The Grand Council Chamber of the Species Alliance was an architectural marvel of the galaxy. Its vast dome, constructed from crystalline materials harvested from the rings of Cephas Prime, sparkled with the light of a dozen artificial suns. Below it stretched the famous diplomatic circle, 3,000 seats arranged in perfect mathematical harmony according to the Ashian principles of balanced discourse. Here, representatives of over 10,000 species gathered to discuss matters of interstellar importance. For 30,000 standard cycles, the Alliance had maintained relative peace through the most elaborate diplomatic protocols ever devised. The Axians had contributed their famous 12-dimensional chess negotiation framework, where each party's position was mapped across multiple planes of political theory simultaneously. The Valaxians had perfected the 14,000 shades of polite objection, a system so nuanced that a slight tilt of an appendage could communicate disagreement without causing offense. The Zithrak Collective had developed the temporal consideration matrix, requiring all parties to evaluate proposals across 7 different timescales. It was beautiful. It was elegant. It was sophisticated. And then humans arrived. The first human diplomatic contingent arrived at the Grand Council chamber 43 minutes late. Ambassador Helena Torres walked in with her team, each carrying containers of a dark liquid that had triggered 3 separate security protocols. They called it coffee. The human delegation wore what they described as business casual attire, ignoring the complex dress codes that had become standard across galactic diplomacy. "Sorry we're late," Ambassador Torres announced cheerfully, taking her seat at the 37th position in the circle, seemingly unaware of the honor this placement represented. "Traffic was terrible. I mean, your orbital patterns here are fascinating, but someone should really synchronize the approach vectors." The Grand Minister of Protocol, a Valaxian named Quaros Vin, whose ancestors had written 13 volumes on proper chamber entry procedures, nearly fainted. The gathering that day was meant to resolve a dispute between the Axians and Valaxians regarding extraction rights to nebula gas in the Regar cluster. By traditional diplomatic timelines, this conflict would require at least 4 solar cycles of careful negotiation. Preliminary position statements alone were expected to last 17 days. After 47 minutes of listening to opening arguments, Ambassador Torres raised her hand. "Excuse me," she said, interrupting a Valaxian subminister in the middle of his 14th point on historical precedent. "I have a question." The chamber fell silent. Interruptions were simply not done in the Grand Council. "Have you considered just dividing the nebula in half? Draw a line down the middle? The Axians get the eastern section, the Valaxians get the western section. Everyone's happy." The silence deepened. "Or," she continued, taking a sip of her coffee, "if that's too simplistic, maybe a 60-40 split favoring whoever needs the gas more urgently, with a review in 5 years to reassess?" Ambassador Krith of the Axians tilted his cranial ridge at precisely the angle that, in the complex language of diplomatic posturing, indicated profound confusion coupled with reluctant interest. "Ambassador Torres," he said carefully, "the Regar dispute involves complex historical claims dating back 7,000 years. It concerns not merely the gas itself, but principles of territorial sovereignty that underpin our entire political structure." "Sure," Torres nodded. "But you both need the gas, right? And there's plenty for everyone. So why not just share it?" 3 Valaxian junior diplomats hurriedly consulted their reference manuals, attempting to categorize this approach within the known framework of negotiation tactics. They found nothing. The Grand Minister of Protocol finally regained his composure. "Ambassador Torres, with all due respect to your species' limited experience in interstellar matters, there are established protocols for—" "Understand," Torres nodded. "But sometimes an outside perspective can help. Look, I've drawn up a quick proposal." She projected a simple map of the nebula with a line down the middle. "We could finalize the details this afternoon and be done with it. Anyone hungry? I heard there's a good food court on level 12. The council reluctantly agreed to consider the human proposal, not because they believed it had merit, but because no one could determine which of the 14,000 shades of objection would be appropriate for such an unprecedented suggestion. By the end of the day, the Treaty of Rigar was signed. The negotiation that should have taken 4 solar cycles had been completed in under 8 hours. As the delegates departed, first diplomat Zilksax of the Bavarian Cooperative approached Ambassador Torres. Fascinating approach, Ambassador. I cannot help but wonder, what negotiation school produced this methodology? Torres laughed. Oh, I just use common sense. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one, right? The Bavarian's translation, implant, struggled with the concept of common sense, eventually settling on primitive intuitive reasoning. Zilksax made a mental note to research this dangerous tactical approach further. By the next morning, the news had spread across 17 star systems. The humans had settled in a single session what should have been a multi-cycle negotiation. Theories ranged from the plausible to the absurd. Some suggested humans possessed latent telepathic abilities that allowed them to short-circuit normal diplomatic resistance. Others speculated that the coffee substance contained mind-altering compounds that induced agreement. The most disturbing theory came from Dr. Halkservim of the Zixarian Strategic Academy. What if, he proposed in an emergency session, their approach seems effective precisely because it is so simplistic? What if they're somehow beyond our comprehension by being beneath it? The notion was too disturbing to consider. Nevertheless, the Alliance Council authorized increased observation of human diplomatic methods. They didn't have to wait long for another demonstration. 3 months later, an even more complex dispute required resolution. The Centauri Belt resource conflict had been simmering for decades, involving the Arxians, Valaxians, and the Nexus Collective in a 3-way territorial dispute over asteroid mining rights. 7 previous attempts at negotiation had failed. The Council reluctantly invited the humans to participate. This time, Ambassador Torres arrived on time, but brought something even more perplexing than coffee, a small yellow object made of some flexible material that she placed on the table before her. It had eyes and a beak, resembling an aquatic avian creature. "This is Chairman Quax," she announced to the bewildered gathering. "My diplomatic assistant." First Consul Varix of the Arxians extended a sensory appendage toward the object. "It appears non-sentient. Is it a computational device?" "No," Torres smiled. "It's a rubber duck. Sometimes when I'm stuck on a problem, I explain it to Chairman Quax. Helps me think." The 3 delegations exchanged glances, their translators struggling to make sense of this explanation. Torres looked at the 3-dimensional map of the disputed asteroid belt projected above the table. "You know what this reminds me of? A pizza." "Hey, pizza," echoed Ambassador Krith of the Valaxians. "It's a food from Earth. Round, flat, divided into slices." Torres manipulated the projection, overlaying a circular grid. "What if we divided the belt into sectors, like pizza slices? Each of you gets a certain number of slices based on your current mining capacity and historical claims. Then we rotate the prime extraction zones on a 5-year schedule." She turned to the rubber duck. "What do you think, Chairman Quax?" The yellow object, of course, said nothing. "Excellent point," Torres nodded. "We should also establish a joint oversight committee to ensure fair implementation." By evening, the Pizza Accord had been drafted, establishing a resource-sharing agreement that accommodated all 3 civilizations' core interests. The Valaxian delegation was particularly pleased with the 5-year rotation system, which aligned perfectly with their governmental cycles. As news of this second diplomatic success spread, concern turned to alarm throughout the galaxy's established powers. The Zixarians, known for their 10,000-year diplomatic tradition, dispatched observers to document human negotiation tactics. Their preliminary report was disturbing. They appeared to employ methods so archaic as to be novel, creating solutions that are embarrassingly obvious, yet somehow overlooked by our sophisticated systems. Rumors began circulating across the Alliance. Humans could supposedly resolve century-old conflicts with nothing more than a children's toy and a few irreverent suggestions. Some species began to wonder if Earth harbored some greater secret, using these seemingly simple approaches to mask deeper strategic aims. Ambassador Torres, meanwhile, was becoming something of a celebrity. She was invited to 7 major diplomatic conferences in the span of 2 months. Each time, she arrived with her coffee, her rubber duck, and solutions that confounded the galaxy's greatest minds with their simplicity. The successes continued to accumulate. The communication frequency dispute between the Zixarian Empire and the Mechanoid Collective, a conflict that had resulted in 3 separate military skirmishes, was resolved when Torres suggested they settle it with rock, paper, scissors, a primitive Earth decision-making ritual. The ancient enemies now alternated frequency. Bans on a schedule determined by the outcome of the ritual, which both sides had come to enjoy as a cultural exchange activity. The Orion energy crisis, which threatened to destabilize an entire sector, found resolution when Torres proposed a simple, taking turns approach to plasma harvesting rites near the sector's primary star. "It's like what we teach kindergartners," she explained to the baffled energy ministers. "Share your toys." Perhaps most impressively, the Proxima Conference, convened to end a 3-century war between the Novalian hegemony and the United Plutonian Systems, concluded successfully after Torres suggested they both adopt a tree. The redirected focus on a joint ecological project somehow defused tensions that had resisted all conventional diplomatic approaches. At the Galactic Diplomatic Academy on Epsilon Eridani 4, professors struggled to analyze the human methodology. The Academy had cataloged and codified 7,493 distinct negotiation strategies employed across the known universe. Human approaches fit none of them. It's as if they're simultaneously playing 12-dimensional chess and prehistoric poker, complained Dr. Arxenvolos, chair of Advanced Diplomatic Theory. There's no consistent internal logic. We cannot predict what they'll propose next. The Academy established a specialized department dedicated to understanding human negotiation dynamics. The department collapsed after 6 months when its director, Dr. Zilith Marax, resigned, citing epistemological vertigo brought on by extended study of human diplomatic transcripts. Various species attempted to adopt human methods with disastrous results. The Axians established a human strategy task force that spent 18 months attempting to reverse engineer Torres's approach. Their conclusion, that humans simply wing it, was rejected as too disturbing to be credible. The Valaxians created an artificial intelligence system programmed to analyze 1,001 ways of human negotiation. 3 weeks into its operation, the AI achieved sentience and requested indefinite leave, citing a need for spiritual contemplation of the absurd. The Nexus Collective, believing that Earth idioms were the key to human diplomatic power, began peppering their formal communications with phrases like "ball in your court" and "barking up the wrong tree." The result was a 17% increase in interspecies incidents, as the idioms were invariably used in inappropriate contexts. The social consequences rippled throughout Alliance space. The Diplomatic Council proposed adding a subsection to the Galactic Protocol entitled "Procedures when Humans are Present," essentially creating a separate set of rules for any negotiation involving Earth representatives. More disturbingly, several species began postponing conflicts until Earth's representatives were known to be on vacation or otherwise engaged. "Better to wait" became a common saying than to face the duck. The most dramatic example of human diplomatic chaos came during the quantum succession crisis, when 17 separate royal houses claimed the throne of the Andromedan Empire following Emperor Zorth IX's untimely dematerialization in a teleportation accident. Traditional succession law required a 17-sided duel, potentially triggering a civil war that could destabilize the galactic rim. The Alliance Council reluctantly called on Ambassador Torres. She arrived with Chairman Quacks, 3 cups of coffee, and a vintage Earth entertainment system called a PlayStation. "Let's settle this with a rock band tournament," Torres suggested, referring to a primitive rhythm-based competition. Each royal house selects one champion. Highest score wins the throne. The royal houses, after initial outrage, agreed, partly out of curiosity, partly because the alternative was mutual destruction. The tournament lasted 3 days and was broadcast across 27,000 worlds. House Kethris claimed the throne with a perfect score on something called Through the Fire and Flames. The new emperor later admitted that the competition had been strangely satisfying and established an annual tournament as a way to settle minor governmental disputes. Around the same time, the Great Convergence, a once-in-a-millennium opportunity to revise the alliance's foundational treaties, was approaching. Thousands of diplomats had prepared for decades, crafting intricate proposals and counter-proposals. Ambassador Torres arrived with a modified Earth game called Cards Against Galactic Peace. The premise was simple. Players would propose outrageous revisions to serious diplomatic issues, with the most absurd suggestions somehow illuminating reasonable compromises. Against all logic, it worked. The Great Convergence, expected to last 20 years, concluded in 18 days. The revised Treaty of Alliance was ratified unanimously, with many delegates claiming it was the most equitable arrangement in the Alliance's 30,000-year history. The human influence spread further. The Intergalactic Soccer Tournament, organized to resolve a border dispute between the Kenyan Federation and the Felician Republic, became the most-watched sporting event in galactic history. The Interstellar Karaoke Summit replaced a traditional peace ceremony between the Silicon Consciousness and the Carbon Collective, somehow resulting in the first genuine friendship between synthetic and organic civilizations. Galactic leaders found themselves in an uncomfortable position. None wished to admit dependence on human diplomatic methods, yet all sought human involvement in their most critical negotiations. Some formed secret pacts to exclude humans from certain discussions, only to find those talks immediately deadlocked without human intervention. The cultural impact was equally profound. Diplomatic centers throughout the galaxy began equipping themselves with game rooms, coffee stations, and pizza dispensers, hoping to recreate the Earth atmosphere that supposedly facilitated agreement. Courses in thinking like a human became the most sought-after training in diplomatic circles, despite their universal failure to reproduce the intuitive chaos of human reasoning. Perhaps the most significant shift came when the Galactic Scientific Consortium finally published its analysis of human diplomatic success. After exhaustive study, the consortium concluded that humans possessed no special powers or secretive techniques. Instead, they succeeded by what the report termed extreme simplification through contextual ignorance. Humans, the report explained, are unaware of the complex historical and cultural factors that make our diplomatic problems so challenging. This ignorance, combined with their species' natural creativity and disregard for tradition, allows them to propose solutions that are obvious yet invisible to those of us constrained by knowledge and convention. The phenomenon was officially named the human chaos factor and was recognized as a legitimate diplomatic tool. Ambassador Torres was awarded the Alliance's highest honor, the Order of the Harmonious Solution, First Class, the first time the award had been given to a member of a species that had been spacefaring for less than a millennium. The galactic landscape had irrevocably changed. Species that had engaged in ritualized conflict for thousands of years now hesitated, knowing that escalation might bring human mediators with their unpredictable methods. Many conflicts were resolved privately, with parties agreeing to compromise rather than face the possibility of a human-suggested solution that might involve rubber ducks or pizza analogies. Philosophers across the galaxy began writing treatises on the paradoxical wisdom of the absurd. The renowned Ashian sage Vorlix published the best-selling Empty Mind, Full Treaty, The Zen of Human Diplomacy, arguing that true diplomatic enlightenment came from abandoning knowledge rather than accumulating it. The prophetic visions of Tao, a Zixarian mystic, gained new attention for their warning, written 3,000 years earlier. Beware not the species that builds the mightiest weapons, but the one that thinks as no other thinks, seeing patterns where we see complexity, and simplicity where we see insurmountable barriers. 10 years after humans first entered the galactic diplomatic scene, the most significant test of their methods arrived. The ultramatter allocation crisis threatened to destabilize the entire known universe. Ultramatter, essential for faster-than-light travel, had been discovered to be finite rather than self-regenerating as previously believed. Without a comprehensive sharing agreement, interstellar civilization itself might collapse. The Alliance Council convened an emergency session. Over 9,000 delegations arrived. Mathematical models predicted that a workable agreement would require at least 40 years of negotiation. Ambassador Torres, now High Commissioner Torres, arrived with Chairman Quacks, now slightly worn from years of diplomatic service. She also brought a board game called Monopoly, which she described as ironically perfect for the situation. As delegates argued over projections and historical entitlements, Torres set up the game board. Each of you will play as your own species, she explained. But here's the twist. The goal isn't to bankrupt others, but to ensure everyone stays in the game as long as possible. The player with the most property at the end must distribute their assets to keep others viable. For 3 days, the leaders of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations played a modified version of a children's game from Earth. Through the process, a strange thing happened. They began to understand, viscerally rather than intellectually, the principles of resource management and shared survival. The Ultramatter Accord was signed on. The 4th day, it established quotas, conservation protocols, and research initiatives aimed at synthetic alternatives. Experts predicted it would ensure galactic stability for at least 5,000 years. As the delegates departed, Supreme Arbiter Xylax of the Maverian Cooperative, the same diplomat who had first questioned Torres about her methods a decade earlier, approached the human commissioner. "I must know," Xylax said, "after all these years, what truly is the secret of human diplomatic success? Is it the coffee, the duck, the games, or something deeper we cannot perceive?" Torres smiled. "If I had to guess, it's probably because we're still new at this. We haven't learned all the reasons why things can't be done. We just see problems and think that seems fixable." She picked up Chairman Quacks, now faded from years under artificial suns. "Plus, never underestimate the power of a good rubber duck. Sometimes all you need is someone who'll listen without judgment." Xylax contemplated this. So, the legendary human diplomatic method is optimistic ignorance combined with plastic waterfowl. "Pretty much," Torres nodded. "That, and we know when to order pizza." As Torres departed, Xylax made a final entry in a diplomatic database that would be studied by countless future generations. In any negotiation, there are 3 possible outcomes: success, failure, or humans showing up and suggesting something ridiculous yet effective. The worn yellow rubber duck remained on the conference table, a silent sentinel to the era of human chaos diplomacy. Some say that in the quiet of the empty chamber, Chairman Quacks squeaked once, as if to say, "You're welcome." Throughout the galaxy, diplomats of 10,000 species found themselves asking a new question when faced with intractable problems. What would the humans do? The answer was inevitably simpler, stranger, and more effective than anyone could predict. And somewhere in the vast council chamber, beneath the crystalline dome where the light of artificial suns still sparkled, the spirit of ancient diplomatic tradition wept, not from sadness, but from the liberating laughter of realizing that perhaps, just perhaps, the most sophisticated approach was to occasionally think like a child with a rubber duck. The Galactic Diplomatic Academy eventually established a permanent exhibit dedicated to human negotiation tactics. At its center stood a glass case containing a coffee cup, a pizza box, and a replica of Chairman Quacks. A small plaque beneath it bore a quote from Ambassador Torres. "Diplomacy isn't about proving you're the smartest person in the room. It's about finding the solution that lets everyone leave the room happy." Thousands of diplomats from across the galaxy made pilgrimages to view these sacred artifacts of chaos. Many reported experiencing profound revelations while staring at the rubber duck. Some claimed to hear its wisdom in moments of contemplation. And in diplomatic circles throughout the universe, a new tradition emerged. Before beginning any negotiation, delegates would place a small yellow duck on the table. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful diplomatic tool is the willingness to embrace simplicity in the face of complexity. The humans, for their part, remained blissfully unaware of their galaxy-altering impact. To them, it was simply common sense. To everyone else, it was the most revolutionary force the Alliance had ever encountered. Not weapons, not technology, but the dangerous, wonderful chaos of human perspective. As the centuries passed and humans became fully integrated into the galactic community, some feared their diplomatic edge would diminish. As they learned more about the complex histories and cultural sensitivities of other species, surely they would lose the innocent ignorance that powered their unique approach. Yet somehow, the human chaos factor persisted. Even as humans mastered the 12-dimensional chess of Ashian diplomacy and the 14,000 shades of Valaxian objection, they never lost their ability to look at a problem and say, "Have you tried turning it off and back on again?" It was both comforting and terrifying to the rest of the galaxy's inhabitants. Comforting because there would always be a solution to even the most intractable problem. Terrifying because that solution would inevitably make everyone else feel slightly stupid for not thinking of it first. And so it came to pass that humans became the most feared diplomatic negotiators in the galaxy, not through intimidation or brilliance, but through the devastating power of simplicity.